There we go. Now recording. So, it is true that we are behind, but that's okay. I'm not worried. You shouldn't be worried. I gave you an extension on assignment 1, so it's no longer due Sunday, so there you go. Never say I didn't do anything for you. So, let's get right into it. Wait, is this the right one? Is this the right course? I don't think this is the right course. No, that's not the right course. This is the right course. Here we go. So, it is my intention to blast through this material with aplomb, as we need to get to actual gosh darn JavaScript at some point in this course. So, we are obligated, however, first to talk about CSS again. So, we're going to focus on the stuff that you guys haven't seen before. Alright? So, we can skip much of the introductory material. You know how to include CSS, I assume. You know what a CSS rule looks like, I assume. So, let's take a moment to discuss a few of the more out-of-the-way CSS selectors. Pseudo-class selectors. You use the colon and then you specify a keyword, and the most classic example being hover, right? This you should have seen last semester, am I right? How about pseudo-element selectors? Did you guys see that one? A little bit? Well, let's review it. If you could please open up your favorite code editor, we'll get underway. So, can you see this in the back? Good? Good. There we go. Oh! Actually, I forgot. I need to introduce assignment 1, don't I? Yeah. Let's do that first. since we haven't quite gotten into it yet. So, the assignment description is too verbose. I will summarize it rather than read it to you. So, the purpose of assignment 1, in the broadest possible terms, you will make a website consisting of 2 web pages that link to each other that looks somewhat professional. I am not expecting works of artistic genius. However, looking professional is a good standard for everybody in this room. It doesn't take any skill. Well, it doesn't take much skill, much artistic skill to make something look professional. Looking professional just means that you're not doing things to actively make things look horrible, most of the time anyway. And also complying with responsive design and some of the design principles we've been talking about in class so far. So, JavaScript is not permitted on this assignment. You are, like, we haven't even done JavaScript, but if you came to this already knowing JavaScript, JavaScript is prohibited. So, the goals of this assignment are: 1, review and practice HTML and CSS. 2, learn the course's documentation standards. Here's a big hint. You have to include the statement of authorship at the top of everything. 3, learn to validate your HTML and CSS before you submit it. If you do not validate your work, it will be worth point deductions when it comes to your grade. I expect all of your divs to be closed. 4, learn to host a website, web files on a real web platform, i.e. put it up on CS Unix. 5, learn how to create CSS animation and integrate it into your page. That's something we are going to do today. 6, learn to use Bootstrap to create responsive design. That is something hopefully we will get to mostly this week, but given that we lost the 15-20 minutes at the beginning of class, that's where that chunk has been taken out from, most probably. Pay attention, because we're going to be moving fast. So, here are your technical requirements. You will create a website that consists of 2 different HTML files and 1 CSS file. They are named index.html, page2.html, and assignment1.css. Note that this is case sensitive, particularly on CS Unix. I'm sure everybody has had that experience already. You will create a header, navbar, main, and footer elements on each HTML page. You may further divide these elements with containers as needed, and the use of semantic elements is highly encouraged. Except where noted, the header, navbar, and footer should be the same on both pages. All CSS must be contained within your assignment1.css file. No inline styling is permitted, 0, and no style blocks inside of the HTML file are permitted, 0. None of them. Okay? I will be looking. Well, I have a minion who will be looking. My minion's name is grep. Grep is a program that I can use to search things. And if I find any inline style, I shall be very cross indeed. Your HTML and CSS files must validate to current standards. Do not use break tags to affect the placement of objects in your page. That is the job of CSS. Once again, there are only two situations where break tags are permitted. What are they?
Poetry.
Hey, what?
Poetry.
Poetry is one. What's the other? Forms. Very good. Each page of the website must contain at least one image linking to an external file, JPEG, PNG, AVIF, etc. When you upload to CS Unix, view your uploaded web page and make sure that all of your linked files display. I don't care if you've left a hole in your web page for an image. If the image doesn't come through because you've done something with, naming the file locally on your local machine and forgetting that, you're doing this on the server ultimately. If the image doesn't come through, then you have not met the requirement to have an image. Broken links are as bad as not having it in the first place. Okay? Actually, ethically, it's even worse because you could have forgotten the image requirement, but to have filled the image requirement and then done so poorly that it doesn't actually come through on the final event, that's worse somehow, Each page of the website must contain a responsive design using the Bootstrap CSS library targeting at least two views, desktop and mobile, typically. Only Bootstrap 5 may be used. No other versions are permitted. And when we get to Bootstrap, I'll go over this again, but a thing that you have to be careful with Bootstrap is if you're just using Google and you're searching show me a Bootstrap nav bar or something like that, much of the time the links it gives you will be to previous versions of Bootstrap, Bootstrap 4 typically. If you try to use the Bootstrap 4 information to design your Bootstrap 5 website, it's not going to work out in your favor. So please be careful when you're clicking links that you are looking at information only for Bootstrap 5. You can also just go to the W3 Schools page on Bootstrap 5, or you can include Bootstrap 5 in your search term, right? And, one of the things that's true about the accursed chatbot is that because the way that it generally works is to aggregate articles, most of the articles that it's aggregating will be old. Therefore, the accursed chatbot normally gives you out-of-date information. All right? So please make sure, I'm not saying that Bootstrap is so recent, but just as a general thing, you have to be careful about the chatbot because the information that it's giving you is often 15, 20 years old. Okay? Research skills does not mean using ChatGPT. Research skills means being able to critically evaluate the information that you're receiving to see if it is good information. Okay? It ultimately comes down to attention to detail. Here are some additional requirements. Your header must include the following elements: an original CSS animation that lasts at least 20 seconds, or preferably repeats infinitely. The animation must modify at least 3 different CSS properties. It could be used for a decorative or a functional purpose. You must also have the title of your page, your name, and student number. Your nav bar must include the following elements: links to the index page and page 2. The link of whatever page you're on should be non-functional, grayed out, that type of thing. Your anchor tags must be styled to look like buttons, but not be buttons. This is something you can do fairly easily with Bootstrap, but essentially don't use the button HTML element, use something else, but it's going to get styled with CSS to look like a button. Okay? Further, an original CSS animation that activates on hover or focus of the links. All right, now for the meat and potatoes. Your website's themes, your website theme will be selected from the following list of themes, unless there's something else that you'd like to do that you would wish to seek approval for with me. Send me an email if you want to do something that's not on this list, but you know, it's a pretty broad list, so you can probably find something to do there. Number 1. A reflection on your goals in coming to college on the index page, and an analysis of what skills you have developed in your first semester on page 2. So this is the very reflect on your life, you know, reflect on your resume type answer. Number 2. A brief description or overview of an interest or hobby that you have on the index page, and a specific example of your involvement with that interest or hobby on the second. Normally, I must say, most of my best submissions come from that category, as people tend to be interested in their interests. So, 3, for all of you creative writing types out there, an original short story about your character registered trademark, going on a field trip to a Hamilton area museum on the index page, and what happens when the exhibit suddenly comes to life. Take that with, take that with as much creativity as you'd like. You're not going to get a huge amount of opportunity for creativity here, so take it where you can get it. Number 4, present a poem on the index page and a short article about your interpretation of the poem on page 2. The poem may be copied from the internet, but it must be sourced in a comment if you do so. Note, this also leaves room for this to be your original poetry. So, if you are a poet, there is a topic for you. By the way, do not use ChatGPT to generate the content for your website. All right? It will be very obvious. All right? Your interpretation. Perhaps the poem that you have selected has something to do with you, your own person, and your struggles in life, or something. I don't know. I don't know if you struggle in life, but if you do, maybe there's a poem that expresses your struggles. So, and that applies everywhere as well. Do not use ChatGPT to generate the content of your website. All right? This is to be your work. Finally, a faux landing page for a blog introducing yourself on the index page, and a faux blog entry about what you hope to do for a living after college. So, if all of these topics seem very nicey nice, goody two-shoes kind of topics, just keep in mind that your interest or hobby could be like death metal. So, if you want to have something a little bit less saccharine, then that is your option. Okay? Sound good? I can spot ChatGPT generated text a mile off. I will not be fooled. All right? We should also discuss length. I will not be impressed if your page is 2 or 3 sentences. All right? If you're giving me this much text on a whole web page, and that is your content, I will not be impressed. All right? I'm expecting probably at least 500 words. Okay? Now, yes, 500 words, grind it out. Shouldn't be that hard once you get going. 500 words is enough to fill out a page. All right? So, 500 words of non-ChatGPT generated text. All right? Again, choose something you're interested in. Yes?
So is that 500 pages for all the different themes, depending on what you pick, or like if you use images for some things?
You have to give me either 500 words or something that looks like the same amount of work as 500 words.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes?
You said ChatGPT, but what about Copilot?
Similar restrictions. Although I think actually Copilot probably would give you poetry analysis if you asked, right? I mean, I think I saw at one point that like it was like someone was trying to do something with it and it started like giving them like a recipe for a cake or something. You know? Things are still so simple that you shouldn't need Copilot. All right? Of course, I think that's probably the case up until 5th semester. So, yeah. If you don't learn to do it yourself, you won't know it in an interview. All right? Good. Oh, and while we're on the subject of things not to do not copy content from an existing website or Wikipedia to flesh out your page. Similar restrictions on just plain copying off the internet. Still bad. Even in the era of ChatGPT, regular plagiarism is still plagiarism as well. All right? Good. Hints and notes. This is mostly to do with how to upload things to CS Unix, which you guys are already aware of, presumably. A further additional prohibition on use of break tags, except if you do the poem. All CSS must be contained in external CSS files. Don't forget the comment with your name, student number, and the file's purpose. And again, you must perform simultaneous submission to CS Unix and to Canvas, the two sets of files must match exactly. All right? I will not have anybody sneaking bug fixes in after the assignment deadline. I will be checking, once again, automatically using one of my software minions. Okie dokie? Any questions about assignment 1? Okay. Didn't Word Notepad have a word count somehow? I'm gonna have to use stupid Word, aren't I? Blah. There we go. So, for reference, this amount of text is 300 words, but it's screwed this up. So, that much text, that's 300 words. Do 2 more paragraphs on top of that. That's how much writing I expect for your website. All right? Across both of the pages. All right? It's about a page of written text in a word in a word processor. Okay? So, all right. If there are no questions about that, then let's continue talking about CSS pseudo-element selectors, shall we? Any lingering questions or concerns about assignment 1? Okay. Good. So, let's take some text, make a website out of it. There we go. If we view our web page, just some text in a website. All right, good. So, the purpose of a pseudo-element selector is to be able to target things with CSS rules at a finer grain, like a finer level of resolution than HTML elements themselves. All right? So, for example, you know how in a lot of like written books, the first letter of the book is often large and capitalized? Well, we have a CSS selector for that. Paragraph at first letter. Reloading the page. There you have it. For each paragraph, we assign we assign a CSS rule to only the first letter of each paragraph. Make sense? We can also, first line will give you, as you might imagine, the first line of every paragraph. Now, imagine how much work it would be to try to pick out the first line of a paragraph and apply a CSS rule to it, right? Because the thing about these paragraphs is that, the amount of text in the first line is dependent on the width of the viewport, right? You basically you would have to have a span element that would encompass the first line, and then somehow, possibly using JavaScript, you would have to dynamically scale the amount of text that was in that span based on the width of the viewport in order to maintain only this amount of text in the first line colored green, right? Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a tremendous pain in the arse to me. So, pseudo-element selectors gets you there without all the work. Make sense? There are other ones as well, first and last, which target the portion immediately before and immediately after the text as such. But we need to keep moving, so I'll let you look up the rest of them on your own time. Okay? Oh, there is one though that I'll show you, which is kind of cool. Selection. Anybody care to guess what selection is? Anybody?
When you highlight, like click and drag over text.
Indeed. Very good. So, if you are so, if your color theme means so much to you that you even need the highlighted text to be highlighted in some particular way, this is the way that you can do it. You can also do stuff that I wouldn't recommend. Like, for example, font size 24, so that, oh, it's not going to do it. Oh, that's a shame. That'd be interesting as like a compatibility mode for like older persons, like a built-in magnify feature. But so it goes. But yeah, make sense? Good. Any questions? Good. So now let's talk about attribute selectors. Attribute selectors those are going to start to come up when we do JavaScript as well. So this is not just for CSS, this is also for JavaScript. So let's imagine ourselves in a situation, right? Let's say we have form input elements, right? Form inputs take many different, well, forms. There are many types of them, right? In text, password, the little slide bars, rich text areas, file upload buttons, the submit button, right? These are all very different things, and we may want to write style rules that are different for these different types of things, right? However, it's not obvious, using only what we know so far about CSS selectors, how we might go about getting a radio box as opposed to a checkbox, right? That's where your attribute selector comes in. If you use square braces, you can match HTML elements with a given attribute value. So, for example, let's say I had a nice little form . Right? There we go. Maybe I want to style my text slightly differently from my password field. We could say input with type is equal to text. Have that color be, or background color, let's make that the hello world of CSS colors, Alice blue. And then type password. Here we go. Background color. Give me the worst CSS color, like the worst one.
Yellow, white.
What? Well, okay, fine. Ha 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 ha. White, yes. Okay. Give me a non-white, terrible CSS color.
Khaki.
Khaki, there's a good one. There we go. Oh yeah. That's pretty bad. Although I kind of expected it to be a bit more brown, you know? Yeah. Mm. Let's see here. Dark khaki, that's dark khaki. There we go. I think that's what people sort of think more when they hear the word khaki. That's closer to the color they're actually thinking of. So, yes. Note, if we had written a rule for input without specifying the type, we would get background color khaki applied to everything. So, make sense? Any questions? So another like useful application of this, let's just cast our brains forward a little bit into JavaScript, all right? When we have a radio box list, right, or a checkbox list, how do we know whether a box is checked or not? When the user clicks a checkbox, what happens? What gets set?
Selected?
Yeah, so like, if I have a checkbox, right? If I have 3 checkboxes, and the user clicks this one, what is true in terms of HTML about this one that's not true of these ones? The checked, what's the term for? It's starts with an A. Attribute, yes. So the input has a checked attribute, which gets true when the item is checked. False if it's not. If you bake checked equals true into your initial HTML that you've written, you start with like one of them by default checked off, but the user can like uncheck it, right? Sets the initial state. So you can use attribute selectors to grab page elements or to grab the checkboxes which are actually checked. So the alternative to that, which is, you know, still very, very possible, but you're not kind of using the system to its maximum effect, right? You grab references to all of the checkbox fields in JavaScript. You go through each one, checking the checked attribute one at a time. You'd have to do it in a loop, right? And then you do something with it. As opposed to simply only pulling out the ones that are checked in the first place. It saves you a couple of steps. All right? Make sense? Okay. Good. Any questions about CSS selectors? All right, now we're going to talk about CSS selector priority. All right? So, what does the C in CSS stand for?
Cascade.
Yes, cascading. So, just give me a moment. It's a really persistent one. You know, just like moves into the sinuses and stays there for a month, that kind of one, you know? Yeah. Pardon me. So, I blew all information about CSS out of my brain. Does anybody else want to do the class? I forget everything. No? I guess, okay, let me see if I can. So, to some extent, using cascading style sheets with a lot of overrides is bad design, right? When you have a system designed to cope with a lot of conflicts, the best design practice is to simply not write the conflicts in the first place, right? To be aware of what would be conflicting with what else, right? And to just avoid the situation entirely. However, it's not always possible. The system is designed to do this sort of thing, so we should explore, at least for a little bit, how it is that CSS will interfere with itself. So, I'm going to go into my web page and I'm going to assign a couple of IDs and classes. ID first, class foo. ID, let's put this class foo is here as well. ID second, there we go. All right. So, let's say, just for the sake of interest, we have a rule that sets paragraph text color. Sets for all paragraphs. There we go, there we go, there we go. So the first thing that we can note already, we have a CSS rule being overridden already, right? The rule that we used to set the text red here is being overwritten by the rule that sets the first line green, right? So the pseudo element selector is already overriding this that we just wrote. Make sense? So, that being said, what happens if I, and this is going to look very Christmassy, but if I set this to background color red instead of text red? Oh, terrible. But, note, what color is that first line?
Green.
Right. So, it's green, but the background color is red. So this is the first rule of CSS, the first rule of cascading. Cascading is determined on a style attribute by style attribute basis, right? For each style attribute, a different cascade happens, right? And overriding things only happens if the properties are actually in conflict. I can demonstrate this somewhat further. Let me choose something slightly less offensive. There we go. So let's consider how things are working here. The rule P establishes background color of Alice blue and text color of violet. The first line rule sets the first line green, overriding violet. But you will notice the background color is still Alice blue. So when we have performed the override, it has only overridden one of the two properties in that rule. The other property has been left alone because it doesn't conflict, right? So, property by property basis. It's not like you're taking entire rules and just crossing them out, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Good. Now, what if I wrote a rule for first? And let's call color, what's a CSS color? Anybody? I already used violet.
You did, my bad.
Yeah.
Steel blue.
Steel blue. There we go. when we reload the page, perhaps not surprisingly, the first paragraph, which is the paragraph that this ID applies to, turns steel blue. So, this rule is overriding that one. Alright? So, in terms of the hierarchy, pseudo-elements seem to be crushing everything else. We're trying to determine IDs, classes, and elements. So, we can say from this, an ID crushes an element, right? Let's try class foo. Get ready for another CSS color.
Salmon.
Huh?
Salmon.
Salmon. Ooh. All right.
Kevin's on top of it.
And, okay. Let's take a survey. How many people think that the first paragraph will turn salmon? Everybody thinks yes? Everybody who thinks no? Let's try her out. Nope. However, this other one did. So, it's actually not too bad, salmon. This is a very pastel sort of thing so far. So, we can say that classes are not overriding IDs. IDs override classes, and classes override elements. So, it goes pseudo-elements, IDs, classes, then elements. But wait, there's more. What about the following? P dot foo. Or let's try P at first color. Give me another one.
Chartreuse.
Chartreuse. I think I spelled it correctly. All right. How many people think this paragraph will turn chartreuse? A few people. How many people think no? Let's try her out. Oh, wow. On the subject of things not to do on your assignment. Good grief. Gives me the coughs just to look at it. So, this one has overridden that one. Interesting. How about D dot foo? What's another one? Yellow green. Very good. Refresh. And you can see that this paragraph has now gone yellow green. And finally, let's try P at first dot foo. Color. One final CSS color, please.
Chocolate.
Chocolate. Getting close to lunch, right? There you have it. So this one overrides that one. Oh, and apparently you can use capitals and it's okay. So, essentially, the strength of a CSS selector is calculated from the number of IDs, classes, and elements which are included in the selector. You can use this handy website to view CSS rule priorities. So, if I have merely the humble p, you can see the specificity score is 001. P.foo, 011. So, no matter how many individual elements and classes your selector contains, even one ID is enough to destroy all of them, right? Does that make sense? Whatever wins on this arbitration wins in the CSS cascading styles rules. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. So now, hopefully, you can do a little bit less guesswork and a little bit more, informed, intelligent design when it comes to the application of CSS rules. Basically, this section is intended to help you with, I don't know why my CSS rule isn't doing anything, right?
Wait, do pseudo elements still trump IDs though, right?
Yeah, I don't know if this does this. Let's see here. Yeah, weird. Maybe this is like CSS selectors level 5. I don't know. It does identify a pseudo element and it calls it an element. But as we saw, that does trump everything else. So
Yep.
I think perhaps we hit upon one of the limitations of this website. And of course, you would absolutely want something like selection to override everything else, right?
Right.
Okay, so in general, things go according to this scheme. The way that you break out of the scheme, although it's not recommended that you do so often, is to use the important tag. If you are using the important tag, you should normally view that as an indication that something has probably gone wrong. It's not necessarily your fault, you might be working with people. Other people's broken CSS might become your problem someday, right? In which case, you should use the tools at your disposal, perhaps completely refactoring the entire CSS rule structure is not on your ticket for today, But generally speaking, if important is used, it means that you have felt the need to override the natural structure somehow, right? Which means that, you're working against the natural structure somehow. Important rules will take priority over everything else. After that, inline styling will take priority over that which is found in CSS files or style blocks, and then things proceed according to the regular orientation. Any questions so far? It's also a matter of where the rule originates, though. CSS rules may originate in different, with different people, right? So there are, in general, 3 entities who are all contributing CSS rules to a web page. There is you, the author of the page. There is the browser. This is called the user agent. And there is the end user themselves. In the same way that you can write your own custom JavaScript for a website and execute it using the console, you can do the same thing with CSS rules if you really want to. I don't see how it would be useful personally, but you can do it if you want, right? So, once you are in important territory, the browser actually has top billing. Any important attributes that the browser sets override all other attributes. After that comes the user. So the user can override everything except things that are considered important by the browser. And then finally, number 3, your important rules. So when you use the important tag, you are actually only bumping yourself to the 3rd level of that hierarchy, not all the way to the top. And this is why sometimes even making a rule important doesn't work, right? Rarely, but it happens. After that, CSS animations take priority over all CSS rules in the regular sense. Then after that, it's you and your regular rules, the user's regular rules, and finally, the browser's regular CSS rules are considered last. Does that make sense? Hopefully it makes sense why it was laid out this way. Good. Any questions? Okay. So, we're going to skip the box model. Box model. Margin, border, padding, done. There, we did the box model. Next up, oh yes,
Yeah,
question.
is this PDF on my canvas?
It is.
It is? Okay, I'm just looking for it.
Yes, if you go to modules, module 1, comp 10 to 59, module 1, css.pdf. There's so these teaching articles were put together by Steve Adams, who is professor in verbose mode. There's interesting and useful stuff in these that I don't have time to get to in class, but it's a bit rambly, you know? It's just a little rambly. They are worth going through on your own time, but just a little rambly. So, when we return from break, 15-minute break, we shall do CSS animations. Okie dokie? Wonderful. Please be back at 42? 1142. Okay. So, CSS animation then. So far it's like, well, I know I need to do this on the assignment. So, CSS animation is a process by which we tell an element on a web page to smoothly transition between different CSS attribute values. So, for example, color is represented numerically. We can slide from one color to another by specifying what the first color should be and what the last color should be. Right? This is the essence of CSS animations. You don't have to be an extraordinarily creative person. And honestly, my feeling on CSS animations is a bit like my feeling on background music in video games. It's doing its job when you don't necessarily notice that it's there. Right? So, very good. So let's create a new file, animation.html. So let me just grab this. There we go. And my style block. And my head. Start my body. There, my body is ready. HTML. Glad someone got that. So, for the time being, we're just going to do this with a div. All right. Divs, you can apply a lot of stuff to them. They're very flexible. So, I am putting a div inside here. I'm not even necessarily going to give it anything, any contents, but I am going to call it, I'm going to give it ID anim. There we go. Now, the animation which we are going to perform in this class is keyframe animation. Right? Do I have anybody in the room with any animation experience? Oh yeah. Awesome. Anybody in the room with any video editing experience? Yes. So for all of you folks, you will know what a keyframe is, right? So for the rest of you, basically a keyframe is it's a point in a timeline where I set something to be true, and then we transition in and out of that state over time. That's what keyframe animation is. Keyframe animation can look good, but often looks cheap. So, the way that you set up a keyframe animation in CSS, using the @keyframes frames tag. A little bit like @media, but only insofar as it has the @ symbol. The next thing we need to do is decide on a name for this keyframe animation. I'm going to call this twitchy corners. So, with a keyframe animation, we have to specify a list of keyframes. We tell the keyframe animation how far through the animation we want this keyframe by specifying a percentage of the total elapsed animation. So, perhaps I have frames at 0%, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and 100%. Next, at each of these keyframes, we write what has all appearances of being a reasonably normal CSS rule. So, for example, order dash radius is 0 pixels. There we go. I'll make that to 30. I'll make that 30 at 10 and 30%. Otherwise, 0. I'm also going to have to give the div a couple of like regular CSS properties so that it's on screen and reasonably large. Div order 2 pixels solid black. Background color, make that, oh, I don't know, papaya whip. Width is 300 pixels. Height is 300 pixels. There we go. Taking a look at our, we need to open the other file now. There we go. There's our box. And you may be saying to yourself, but, it's not doing anything. To which I reply, how is this keyframe supposed to know to what page elements it applies? There's no indication here that we're applying it to this div or any other div. So, rule number 2 about CSS animations, you write the animation and then you apply it to elements using CSS rules. So, for example, id anim pseudo class hover, animation name twitchy corners, animation duration 2 seconds. There are 2 pieces of information which are absolutely required in order to perform the animation. 1, you need to know the actual name of the animation itself. That seems obvious. But you also need to know the duration of the animation. If you'll notice, this has not been done in seconds. This has been done in percentages of total duration in order for the computer to calculate when it should be transitioning keyframes. It needs to know 30% of what? Of that, of animation duration. Make sense? So far so good? Cool. So, saving that, reloading the page. Boop. There you go. My corners just twitched. Pretty good, right? Now, it's not staying, right? It's playing it once and then it's finishing. There's a property for that. Animation iteration count. You can set this to a number, like 10, but you can also set it to infinite. And then it will just do it forever. Maybe this isn't twitchy enough for us. Increase speed and increase twitch factor. There you go. Almost looks like a heart beating. This div represents what happens to your body when you drink one of those awful energy drinks. So, so, any questions about that? Please note once again that we are overriding only those properties which are being specifically addressed. We're not interfering with other properties, right? Now, it is possible to compose more than one attribute change into these keyframes. For example, perhaps up here, margin left is 100. Perhaps here, margin top is 100 pixels. Need the units. Oh, I need a semicolon. There you go. So, you might be wondering why we're getting that like awful jump at the beginning, right? That's because in the very first frame, in the first keyframe, I've set margin left to 100 pixels. By the end, margin is at margin left is at 0 pixels, but there is no soft transition between 100% and 0. If you don't want it to jump when the animation ticks over from one iteration to the next, then keyframe 100 must be the same as keyframe 0. So, if we take this Put it right there. Maybe margin left is 200 pixels. There we go, right there. Need a semicolon. So you see you can get it to move around the page too. So I'd like to take a moment to discuss the CSS animations that are required in your assignment. All right? Now, these, of all aspects of the assignment, the CSS animations are, I've seen some pretty ugly ones in my time, basically. So, you can do things like rotation, right? You can do things like move things around the page. One of the I have seen some really awful animations students have submitted where they'll take their student number, right? It starts off and then it just kind of slowly drifts and pinwheels across the page. We're now well outside of the page now, and the dreaded horizontal scroll bar has been introduced. And then it comes back in and pops in and then is off page again, doing this absolutely ridiculous loop. Terrible CSS animation. If it's a rule that you should never have a horizontal scroll bar ever, that applies triply so to CSS animations. You should never have a CSS animation which introduces a horizontal scroll bar. All right? Please. Please. So that's chaotic evil. That's the chaotic evil of CSS animations. This is getting pretty chaotic evil, I have to say. This looks pretty bad. So lawful good CSS animations. One of my favorites that I ever saw from a student. They had done their web page on a hobby, and their hobby was cycling, and it looked like it had taken a long time to figure out. But basically, what they'd done is they got an image of a bicycle. Ooh, what's the dead. The marker is dead. Long live the marker. So, forgive my somewhat hasty recreation of a bicycle. But what this person had done is they had animated the spokes of the bicycle to rotate so that it looked like the bicycle was, it looked like the wheels were turning. That was cool. That looked like that was a lot of work, and I appreciated that. That was cool. Another one that I saw that I really liked, someone did a, the blog post one, right? And they did a little, porthole window thing with a picture of themselves. All right? They did a picture of themselves in a little blog window thing, but the image itself was doing all kinds of interesting things. It was slightly oscillating up and down, and the picture itself had a slight parallax effect when you scrolled up and down the page, which was very, very cool. And it was just like, it made it look a little loose and unstable, but like it also gave the website great dynamism, you know? Yeah, do you guys know what a parallax effect is? W3 schools will even show you how to do it. It's almost like it's listening to me. Yeah, this will do. So this is with no parallax, right? Yes, good, good, good. This is with parallax, right? Parallax is not a difficult effect to set up. All it means is that you take different layers of your image and you move them at different differential rates based on, you know, in theory it simulates proximity to camera and gives the illusion of depth, right? But yeah, parallax is a really important, get out of here, what are you even doing? What are you even doing? A good example of it as well would be not the movie. There we go. This one. This game has a number of good parallax effects as well. Not just horizontally, but also vertically. You see how the stuff in the foreground of the background is moving at a higher rate than the background. Actually, that's a little too busy. Yeah, there you can really see it, right? It just gives everything depth, right? But anyway. Any questions about that? Yes?
So if I, in the assignment, so if I slap one of these shapes with the face there, like just jumping around, would that get me like that one?
So long as it modifies at least 3 properties, and I'm not going to count like margin left and margin top separately, right? Yeah, it has to modify at least 3 properties. I am looking for it to not look awful, right? Like, again, the goal is professionalism, right? However, in the past, some people have really done some outstanding work on this assignment. So I'm hoping that you folks, you look like a bright bunch. I'm hoping that you guys can come up with some good websites and not just completely assignment websites. Okay? It's very easy with the CSS animation component of this assignment to kind of be the box ticker, you know? It's like, oh, I did the thing, you know, I have an animation, it does 2 things, I've met the requirements. It's like, you know, if you meet the requirements, expect a B, right? If you exceed the requirements, expect an A. Okay? Yeah. So, here. So, let's talk about something a little bit more boring. Let's talk about timing functions. So, and a few more of these properties as well. So, basically, what I showed you so far has all been linear transition, right? So, if I have point A and point B, and I need to transition between the two of them, there are various ways that you can do that, right? The most basic is to simply do a linear interpolation, or a linear interpolation between the 2 points. There you go, right? So that's linear. You also have something like this, which would be an ease in, and you have this, which would be an ease out, right? Basically, the difference between ease in and ease out is that with an ease in, the differential, the amount that the rate is changing, decreases as we get closer to the end point. So the transition starts fast and then gets slow. With ease out, it starts slow and then gets fast, right? So make a new keyframe keyframe animation from margin left gets 0 pixels to margin left gets say 300 pixels. Let's make these a little smaller. I'm going to give myself a few more divs. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Animation name is move. Animation duration. Let's make that 3 seconds. Animation iteration count is infinite. Actually, you know what? It might be easier to make this a class. There we go. And now, there we go. Anim2 animation timing function linear. I'm probably going to have to look these up. All right, let's see if I did it. I did. So there you go. Ooh, I can even do something like this. top one is the linear function. You can see that it maintains the same speed the entire time. Ease in, you can see, accelerates as it's going. Ease out, decelerates as it's going. But in all cases, all three of these come to rest at the same point at the same time, right? It doesn't affect the overall timing. Does that make sense? There are two other ones. Ease in, out, and the Bezier curve. You can actually determine your own mathematical formulas for these, but it's not normally worth the effort. The presets are pretty good. And then let me see if I can't recall. Cubic Bezier. Yeah. Something like that. Oh, Bezier curve is doing the same thing as ease in out. Interesting. Fine, be that way. But you can probably make that a 2 and probably have an interesting effect. No? Okay, well anyway. So, you can see with ease in, out, that basically, it starts, interesting. It slows down in the middle a little bit. But anyway. So timing functions can be used to get different kinds of behaviors. If you use a timing function that sort of is fast towards the ends and slow in the middle, you kind of get this effect of the animated object going, kind of jumping into the corners of things, right? Or if you go the other way and ease in and out, it sort of moves rapidly in the middle, but comes to a rest relatively gracefully. It's a bit more like how a human being moves, right? So, any questions about that? Okay. Good. Did we miss anything? No? Okay. Shall we move along to Bootstrap then? Good. So, bootstrap, 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 bootstrap. So, frameworks are nice. They save us work. All right? Bootstrap that makes things look very good, and if you're using it correctly, you can make a very professional and good-looking website without once having to write your own custom CSS rule. In fact, you'll notice that for this, I'm going to use Bootstrap entirely. I'm not going to even have a style block, let alone my own CSS file separately. All right? So, what is Bootstrap and how does it work? Bootstrap is a set of CSS class definitions. So it's a bunch of classes that have lots and lots of pre-built, nice-looking CSS built into them, right? All you need to do to apply Bootstrap styling to one of your page components is to include it in the appropriate Bootstrap class, as we're going to see. All right? So, how do we get Bootstrap? Well, there are two main approaches. Both, you go to getbootstrap.com. There you go. Essentially, you can either install the thing on your server, or you can download it on the fly from the Content Delivery Network. So, anybody in this room run a server, run their own server? No? That's okay. So, basically, if you had if you were administering your own server, you would install a program. The source code files for Bootstrap would be provided from your server as opposed to from the internet. The Content Delivery Network is a large distributed network of servers that's all they do is serve the Bootstrap library files, right? When a client loads your website, they have to then, the browser will then go out to the Content Delivery Network, grab the library, pull it into the client, and execute everything, and that's how it works, right? It requires going out into the CDN to get the files. So, it's a little more convenient. All you have to do is include a couple of definitions in the header of your HTML file, and you have Bootstrap. But the one thing that this does kind of lead to is the occasional security concern, right? When it's your server and your files, you can do things like check the signing certificate of the install files to make sure they haven't been tampered with, and you can check, the integrity of the files to make sure you're not distributing malicious code to your client. This is not something you have control over with the CDN. Make sense? That being said, the CDN is good enough for most purposes. Although apparently recently somebody found some kind of interesting exploit to do with the CDNs. Apparently a teenager found this, and people were like, oh, okay, we'll fix that then. So, publicly distributed code can contain attacks. So, for our purposes in this class, we're going to be using the CDN. So, we're going to start a new file. Save as bootstrap.html. So, including it via the CADN is very easy. You simply copy the little clipboard button, copy, and then into the head, pasta, copy, pasta. There we go. You'll notice, if you're paying attention, that we have just imported a CSS style sheet as well as a JavaScript file. These are quote-unquote minimized files, which basically means that if you were to look at them, like look inside the contents of the file, it would look like gobbledygook because they have taken out like all of the white space and all of the non-important characters to make the file size as small as possible for network transmission. That's what a minimized file is. If anybody's ever used jQuery, this is also the way that the jQuery library is typically distributed, is as a minimized file. Make sense? Any question? No? Okay. So, I'm just going to comment these out for the time being. Because there's something I wanted to show you. There we go. If we take a look at how this website renders, you can see it's very default Chrome kind of looking, right? But once I enable Bootstrap, and there are going to be a few changes. Some of them are a little bit subtle, so I would ask everyone to please lift your eyes from your computers, lift your eyes, and watch this screen, watch this text as I change it, okay? Is everybody looking? Here we go. 3, 2, 1. There you go. So you get a little bit just for loading Bootstrap, right? The changes are a little bit subtle, but they're there. You see it's played with the margin and padding. It's played with the font a little bit. But it's Bootstrap's position that that looks better than the default Chrome way of going about it, which, you know, hard to tell so far, but it's entitled to its opinion, I suppose. So, good. Any questions so far? So, the first and very most important thing that Bootstrap helps us do is to turn regular, old, bad, desktop-based designs into responsive, mobile-friendly, mobile-first designs by use of Bootstrap containers. So, if we take the contents of our website, wrap it in a div, all we need to do to enable a Bootstrap container is say class equals container. Now, okay. I know I said I wasn't going to use a style block, but I'm going to use a style block just so we can see where the divs go, okay? I would expect any of you to use this for layout, and then before your final submission, delete this rule or replace it with something that looks nicer. Style, and style, give border 2 pixels dashed gray, margin 2 pixels, padding 2 pixels. And refresh, and there we have it. So, you will notice that we have margin on either side of the page. What you may also notice is that within certain ranges, the actual width of the container remains fixed while the margins are modified in size to maintain that width, right? That is, until we hit a breakpoint. Once we hit a breakpoint, the container contracts to its next breakpoint size and maintains itself until we hit the next breakpoint. Now, at the breakpoint around 570, we snap from having margins to not having margins at all. And we maintain that for the rest of the day. You can also see that the size of the heading is to some degree also proportional to the width of the screen. Make sense? This, by the way, is known as container fluid mode. You can turn any container into a container fluid. It's basically kind of the same thing as width 100%, but with a couple of other things as well. Container dash fluid has the fluid container at any width. Does that make sense? Any questions? So, much less messing around with flex boxes, much less messing around with the media tag. You may also specify where to set a breakpoint according to the preset breakpoints given in this chart. Pardon me. So, if you want your smallest breakpoint to be large, this is the point at which you flip into container fluid mode, then you would say container-LG. We can take a look at how that works very quickly. Container-LG, there we go. That sets the breakpoint. Oh man. Somewhere in the region that I can't actually slide it along. But yeah, makes sense? So the purpose of manual breakpoints is basically like if the thing isn't working the way that you want it to and things aren't stacking the way that you want them to stack, try setting some manual breakpoints to see if you can get it to behave the way you want it to, right? So one of the very important tools at your disposal is the CSS grid. Now, when I asked the other class their opinion of CSS flexboxes versus grids, they were of the opinion that CSS grid is the worst thing ever. Is that true? You guys agree that CSS grid is the worst thing ever? Do you prefer flexbox though? What's worse, flexbox or grid? Flexbox is worse? Okay. Would you prefer to not have to use either of them? Yeah. So, we have a thing called the Bootstrap grid system. It incorporates functionality from both Flexbox and CSS grid. There are some important things to know first. Pardon me for just a moment. So, the Bootstrap grid is arranged somewhat like an HTML table. You have a big containing div that contains rows, right? So you've got the grid is a div. Each row is a div inside of the grid div, right? And then within each row, every column is a div within a row. That's hierarchically how it's been organized, right? The the Bootstrap grid row is composed of precisely 12 individual grid slots, right? So every row has 12 columns, right? This does not mean that you are required to have 12 columns in your row. Bootstrap will calculate how many of the base columns it needs for each of your columns. All right? Make sense? So, let's try it out. Div class is row. Anybody want to guess what the class name for a column is? Call, that's correct. Call your mother. That's just a little joke. You want another joke?
Sure. Yeah.
What do you do with a dead chemist? You bury him. What do you call a cow with no legs?
A cow.
Ground beef. What do you call a cow with 2 legs? Lean ground beef. What do you call a cow with all of its legs? High stakes. So, let's, for the first one, one, let's just put letters in here. The autocomplete is a little annoying. There we go. Let's see what that looks like. So you can see we have each of our 12 columns showing up as divs inside of our website. Now, if we pull this across, you can see they get gradually smaller and smaller as we go. Oh! L jumps to the next line. K jumps to the next line. There we go. So you can see it's automatically stacking the elements of the grid, but it's also doing the flexing, the flexbox thing. It's doing both at the same time with very little effort on our parts, which is just how we like it. All right? Hopefully, a few of you in this room right now are saying to yourselves, wow, I wish they'd have showed me this last semester. So, I would like the name of a fruit. Someone give me the name of a fruit. Apple, pomegranate. Something else?
Lemon.
Lemon, good. Next. Kiwi, starfruit. I see we have a Stardew Valley player in our midst. Lime.
Do you consider a tomato a fruit?
It is a fruit by definition as it contains seeds.
Cucumber.
Cucumber. Also a fruit by definition as it contains seeds.
Watermelon?
Watermelon. Banana.
Strawberry.
Strawberry. Did you know that technically speaking bananas are a type of berry?
Strawberry.
Strawberries are an interesting one.
Yeah.
One more. Blueberry, there we go. Yes, strawberries are a very interesting one. Most of you probably didn't know this about strawberries, but inside of the, so if you take a sort of cross-sectional view of a strawberry, you have like the little divots on the surface that contain the seeds, right? The seeds are on the outside of the fruit, right? That means that the thing that we think of as being the strawberry isn't actually a fruit, right? Anatomically speaking, if you were to blow up one of these seeds and take a look at it, what you actually have is the strawberry seed with a very sort of thin organic coating over top of the seed. That actually constitutes the fruit of the strawberry plant. This is a swollen, engorged stem part that's been filled with sugar to make it attractive to things that wish to eat strawberries. But it's not actually the fruit itself. Now, it's not correct to say if you're eating strawberries, you're not eating the strawberry fruit, because you do eat these things. But the thing that you think is the strawberry is not actually a berry at all. So there you go. Strawberries, not actually berries. Bananas, actually technically berries. I hope we learned something today. Good. So, let's consider what goes on with our, wow, you guys picked some pretty long names actually, in general. That's okay. Man, if only I had a few, like, if only I had a larger monitor, we'd be able to get them all on one line. That's okay. So essentially, this row, as we slide it back and forth, will actually comprise 2 or more rows on screen. But you can see at, as wide as we can get it, the grid system is attempting to line things up to our 12 boxes as well as it can while not interfering with the contents of these divs, right? So gone are the days when we have to refigure everything out because the text inside of the div is overhanging the end of the div, right? Make sense? So far, so good? So, this looks a bit like a nav bar, doesn't it? You could use that for a mobile-friendly nav bar, couldn't you? If you didn't want to use like a drop-down menu, right? You can also use these for like multi-column content formats. So, in our case, we have 12 of these columns going on in a row. The rule with columns is, if you don't specify how many column widths it should occupy, it divides it evenly among all of them, right? So, for example, if we make a new column, or make a new row, maybe grab a couple of paragraphs. There we go. You can see that with only 2 columns, it has divided them 50-50. But what if I don't want them 50-50? What if I want like a small one and a large one? Easy enough. Whichever one you know the width you want, you just say that width. And the other one calculates it, is calculated in response. So maybe I want this column to be width 8. 8 of 12. There you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy. Easy peasy. Now let's see what happens when we hold the width. So at a certain point, it decides this is too narrow, this is also too narrow, and boop, automatically stacks them. This is mobile-friendly design, my friends. Make sense? Good. Let me just talk quickly on the subject of images and how you work an image into this, and then we can get out of here. Okay? So, let me just grab an image. There you go. Mount Kilimanjaro. Very good. Famous mountain. There we go. You can see, I revealed it. In the last class I was doing Bugs Bunny. We can do Bugs Bunny too if you want. You guys want to do Bugs Bunny?
Yes.
Okay. Not actually Bugs Bunny though, but another Looney Tunes character. What's a Looney Tunes character?
Sesame Sam.
Yep. Yosemite Sam. There we go. Very good. Noted antagonist. Noted cartoon antagonist. Wow, that's an SVG. That's actually probably not going to work. Let's try that one. WebP. Okay. There we go. So, in our page, if we say at the beginning of the first one, throw in image source is, I didn't quite catch the file name. Did I put it in the other folder anyway? I did. Always view file name extensions. You will hear me say it a million times. Yosemite sam.webp. There we go. If we simply import the image, you can see it's actually done some Bootstrap things to like adjust the column sizes, right? This is perhaps not what we want. Right now, the grid is adjusting itself to the image. What we want is the image to adjust itself to the grid. So, my recommended Bootstrap class for this is image fluid. Image fluid will modify the size of the image based on the size of the container, which looks good pretty much no matter what you're doing. A thing that you often do in mobile versions of apps and that sort of thing is you would have this either not appear at all or be collapsible, right? You have to keep in mind when you're designing for mobile, design for, sure, this one. Really. The thing that you always want to maintain when you're designing for mobile is like, this region here is like the region that the person will look at first. This should never be blank, like dead space. This should always be the interesting stuff in here. And if like your image is like occupying half the screen when they first load the web page, you're probably doing something wrong. Any questions? All right. Thank you for your time and attention today, folks. We will resume next week. Good luck on your assignments. If you have any problems, email me.